The night had fallen over Montecito like a velvet curtain, soft and quiet, masking the tension that crackled beneath its surface. Inside their sprawling, sun-kissed home, a silence hung heavier than the Pacific fog outside. Prince Harry had been pacing for nearly an hour, his mind racing, heart pounding, and a question gnawing at him relentlessly. It wasn't a question about the world, the monarchy, or even the media circus they had left behind. No, this was something far more personal. Something that cut straight to the core of his marriage, to the woman he had vowed to love and protect. And then, with a voice that trembled just slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of suspicion, he asked the words that would change everything. "Who is he, Meghan?" For a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with a quiet intensity that made every heartbeat echo like a drum. Meghan's eyes widened, her carefully constructed composure cracking just enough for Harry to notice. A flicker of something, surprise, guilt, fear, passed across her face, but it was gone before he could be sure. The air between them became electric, charged with questions that had been festering silently for weeks, maybe months. The late-night meetings, the unexplained absences, the hushed conversations with people whose names Harry barely recognized. All of it boiled down to this single moment, this single question, and it hung between them like a guillotine, ready to fall. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why now? Why tonight? Harry had tried to dismiss the nagging unease at first, chalking it up to paranoia or the pressures of their new life in California. Moving from the royal spotlight to Hollywood's glare had been challenging enough, but there were whispers he couldn't ignore. Rumors of secret meetings with a Hollywood producer, maybe an actor, someone involved in Meghan's ambitious new projects. Harry had prided himself on trusting Meghan, defending her fiercely when the tabloids tore her apart. He had always been the protector, the one who shielded her from judgment, criticism, and the relentless glare of public scrutiny. But trust, he realized, wasn't unconditional. It had to be earned, preserved, and sometimes fiercely questioned. The question, "Who is he, Meghan?" wasn't just a line in an argument. It was a culmination of suspicion, fear, and heartbreak. It was the moment where a marriage, carefully curated in public but vulnerable behind closed doors, faced its ultimate test. And Meghan's reaction, the pause, the subtle flinch, the way her gaze darted away, told him that this was bigger than he had imagined. From the outside, their life seemed perfect. Photographs of them smiling on yachts, attending galas, and waving to adoring fans painted a picture of harmony and glamour. But the truth, Harry realized, was never that simple. Behind the curated Instagram posts and the polished interviews, there had always been tension, small fissures that grew quietly over time. Late nights where Meghan claimed she was working on a project, but her phone would be mysteriously silenced. Invitations to dinner or meetings that seemed innocuous but had a shadow of secrecy hanging over them. It was this pattern, subtle but persistent, that had led Harry to tonight, to this confrontation. And Meghan, how had she felt all this time? Did she anticipate this question? Did she see the storm coming? She had always been savvy, charming, and quick to navigate the treacherous waters of fame and scrutiny. Hollywood had trained her well, but the private realm of marriage, with its unspoken truths and quiet betrayals, was an arena where charm could falter. Harry could see it in her eyes, that brief moment of uncertainty, a crack in the armor that she so carefully wore in public. The tension was unbearable. Harry's voice, low but sharp, broke the silence again. "Meghan, who is he?" The words weren't just a question. They were an accusation, a challenge, a plea. It was a demand for honesty, for clarity, for a truth that he feared might shatter everything they had built together. And Meghan, for all her poise, hesitated. She opened her mouth, paused, then closed it again, as if choosing her words with the precision of a chess master, knowing that the wrong move could change the course of their lives forever. This wasn't a story of public scandals or tabloid sensationalism. This was intimacy under siege, the private unraveling of a partnership that had once seemed unbreakable. And yet, even as Harry's mind raced with images, conversations, and snippets of behavior, he had to confront a reality he had been avoiding. That the people we love can sometimes harbor secrets, not out of malice, but ambition, fear, or desire. But what had triggered this question tonight? Perhaps it was the whispers he had heard around the edges of Hollywood, the fleeting mentions of a producer who seemed too interested, a schedule that didn't quite add up, or the subtle changes in Meghan's demeanor when certain names came up. Or maybe it was just instinct, the kind of gut feeling that comes when something doesn't sit right, no matter how much evidence is presented or dismissed. Whatever it was, Harry knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. And so he asked, knowing that the answer, no matter what it was, would reverberate far beyond the walls of their Montecito home. And Meghan, how did she process it? In that brief moment, she was confronted not by the cameras, not by the public, not by the whispers of journalists or critics, but by the person who knew her most intimately. The person who had stood by her through the storms of the royal family, the global media, and relentless scrutiny. And now, he was asking a question that struck at the very heart of trust and loyalty. Outside, the night continued, indifferent to the turmoil inside. The waves crashed quietly against the shore, a rhythmic reminder that the world goes on, even when lives are caught in private storms. And inside, time seemed to stretch, elongated by tension, by anticipation, by the unspoken words hovering between them. What would Meghan say? Would she reassure Harry, offer explanations that could mend the fraying edges of their relationship? Or would her answer confirm the fears he had tried so desperately to suppress? In that instant, everything hung in the balance. Their love, their trust, their future, all dependent on the revelation that was about to come. And yet, the story doesn't end here. Because in every relationship, secrets have a way of surfacing, and truths, when hidden too long, carry the weight of inevitability. Harry had opened the door. He had asked the question that no one else could, the question that demanded honesty above all else. And Meghan, caught between her ambitions, her loyalty, and the scrutiny of the man she loved, had a choice that could alter everything. But what she did next would shock even those who knew her best. It would challenge assumptions, spark whispers that would ripple through Hollywood and beyond, and set the stage for a confrontation that no one saw coming. The tension, the suspicion, the secrecy, all of it was about to collide in a moment that would define the trajectory of their lives, both publicly and privately. And this was just the beginning. Because in a story filled with glamour, power, and ambition, the private moments. The questions whispered in the dark, the glances exchanged in silence, the small signs of secrecy, often tell the most shocking stories. Stories that the cameras never capture. Stories that the world only learns when the veil is lifted. Tonight, that veil had been lifted, and the question, who is he, Meghan, would become the catalyst for revelations, confrontations, and truths that had been waiting patiently in the shadows. The world might never know all the details, but for Harry and Meghan, nothing would ever be the same again. But what Meghan said, or didn't say, in that charged moment would change everything. And no one, not even Harry, could predict the storm that was about to erupt. Why didn't you tell me about the meeting last night? Harry's voice cut through the quiet of the early morning, sharper than he intended. The words had been brewing inside him for days, perhaps weeks, but now they poured out like a dam breaking. Meghan's calm demeanor faltered, just slightly, her perfectly poised expression betraying the slightest flicker of uncertainty. Harry watched closely. He had learned to read those micro-expressions over the years, the fleeting signs that someone was hiding something. The first seed of suspicion had been planted long before this moment. It had started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A canceled dinner here, an unexplained call there, a message left unsent, the kind of small actions that, in isolation, seemed trivial, but in aggregation formed a pattern that could not be ignored. For someone like Harry, who had been trained to notice inconsistencies, to detect the slightest irregularities in body language or conversation, these patterns were impossible to dismiss. It began on a quiet Tuesday evening. Meghan had claimed she was working late on a new production project, one of the ambitious ventures she had been nurturing since their move to California. Harry had asked about it before, casually, in the same way a supportive husband might inquire about a partner's career. Meghan had smiled, deflected, offered vague details, names of collaborators, general objectives, and a promise to discuss it later. At the time, Harry had shrugged it off. After all, People kept secrets about work all the time, right? Hollywood was a world filled with deals, negotiations, and confidential arrangements. It wasn't unusual. But then came the first anomaly. Harry remembered the way her phone had disappeared into her clutch bag during dinner, her movements just a touch too deliberate, too controlled. When he asked why she hadn't answered a call from a producer he vaguely knew, she offered a simple explanation. She had been busy, the call was rescheduled, nothing to worry about. And yet, the instinct that had kept him safe in battlefields, press scrutiny, and the relentless glare of public life whispered to him that something was off. Then came the whispers. In Hollywood, whispers travel fast, much faster than any official statement or public announcement. People notice patterns. They talk. And soon, Harry started hearing hints of late-night meetings, names that sounded familiar, but whose connections to Meghan weren't fully clear. Producers, actors, consultants, people who had been involved in small projects with her, all appearing at unexpected times, in unexpected places. Every detail seemed minor until viewed as part of a broader mosaic. And Harry, ever vigilant, began connecting the dots. The canceled dinners weren't random. The sudden trips to downtown studios weren't coincidental. The way Meghan's schedule seemed to bend around specific individuals raised alarms in his mind. He didn't want to believe it, not at first. Not the woman he had pledged his life to, the person who had stood by him through media attacks, family crises, and global scrutiny. But the feeling persisted, stubborn and insistent, like a shadow he couldn't shake. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he was being paranoid. Perhaps the pressures of life, of fame, and of constant public attention were playing tricks on him. Yet, instinct, the very same instinct that had guided him in life-or-death situations, refused to be silenced. There was something there, something hidden, something important, and he needed to know what it was. Harry's first suspicion wasn't a grand revelation. It was subtle, almost innocuous. He noticed her phone lighting up at odd hours, then disappearing quickly. He noticed the way she avoided certain topics, the slight defensiveness when names came up. It was the accumulation of these small details that ignited the spark. And once that spark was lit, it was impossible to ignore the heat it produced. He thought back to the first time he confronted her, gently, cautiously, like a man walking on eggshells. "Meghan, is there someone I should know about?" he had asked, hoping the question would be dismissed as ridiculous. But Meghan's reaction had been telling. She had paused, hesitated, then smiled. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had said, "Harry, don't be silly. You know I'm committed to us, to you." And yet, in that moment, a seed of doubt had taken root. Doubt is a dangerous thing. It starts small, almost unnoticeable, but once it grows, it changes everything. Harry had felt it creep into his mind at odd moments, during phone calls, while reading scripts, even during casual walks along the Montecito coastline. Every unexplained absence, every cryptic message, every late-night meeting whispered a question he couldn't silence. Who was he, Meghan? And it wasn't just about suspicion, it was about timing. In Hollywood, timing is everything. Deals are struck in hours, opportunities appear and vanish in moments, and influence can be wielded by a single phone call. Harry, attuned to the patterns of strategy and negotiation from his royal upbringing and military experience, understood the stakes. These meetings weren't random. They weren't casual coffee dates or fleeting social interactions. There was intent behind them. There was purpose. And purpose, in this context, always carried the possibility of betrayal, whether intentional or not. Harry began to pay closer attention, almost obsessively. He noticed patterns in her calendar. Meetings with the same individuals, always at odd hours. Flights booked without clear reason. Studio visits that coincided with her announced research trips. Each observation was a brushstroke in a painting that was growing increasingly ominous. The picture it formed wasn't clear, not yet, but it was troubling enough to demand action. And then there was the way she communicated, or rather, didn't. Texts left on read, calls unanswered, vague explanations for absence. Harry's mind raced with scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. Hollywood was a world of facades, where image mattered more than truth, and connections often blurred lines between personal ambition and ethical boundaries. He couldn't help but wonder, was Meghan navigating these waters purely as a professional, Or was there something more personal intertwined with these secretive encounters? The first suspicion had grown quietly, invisibly, until it became impossible to ignore. Harry realized that he couldn't rely solely on instinct anymore. He needed answers, tangible truths. And that realization brought him to the night of confrontation. The moment when all the small clues, all the subtle patterns, all the uneasy feelings culminated in one question. Who is he, Meghan? It was not a question asked lightly. It was the product of sleepless nights, careful observation, and the kind of worry that gnaws at you until it demands acknowledgement. Harry had come to a critical crossroads, where trust had to be challenged, not as an accusation, but as a necessity for clarity. Because without clarity, the weight of suspicion could corrode a relationship from within, silently, relentlessly, until nothing remained but doubt. And Meghan's reaction to this first suspicion would prove pivotal. In that pause, in that delicate balancing of words and expressions, she held the power to either reassure, deflect, or ignite a storm that Harry could no longer control. It was a delicate dance, one performed without music, without cues, yet charged with tension so thick it could be sliced with a knife. But what Meghan did in response, the words she chose, the glances she exchanged, the small hesitations, would set the trajectory for everything that followed. And the storm Harry had sensed for weeks was about to break. Because in relationships, as in life, the first suspicion is never the last. It is a spark that can ignite fires, revealing truths that were hidden, desires that were masked, and ambitions that were carefully concealed. And once the fire is lit, there is no extinguishing it, only watching how it spreads, consumes, and reshapes everything in its path. Harry had asked the question, and now the world, at least their world, was poised on the edge of revelation. What Meghan would say, or leave unsaid, would define not just their marriage, but the narratives of ambition, secrecy, and trust that intertwined their lives. And in that moment, poised between suspicion and revelation, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. It all began with whispers that drifted through the glimmering corridors of Hollywood. Late-night meetings, secret calls, shadowy figures arriving in sleek black cars, pulling up outside quiet, gated homes. To the casual observer, these could have been routine networking events, ordinary appointments, the invisible gears that kept the entertainment machine turning. But Harry noticed patterns where others saw coincidence. The first instance that caught his attention was a Friday evening in early spring. Meghan had mentioned a quick dinner meeting with a producer she had known professionally. Harry had asked casually, "Who's the producer?" And Meghan had offered a vague answer, a fleeting smile, brushing off the question like it was absurdly intrusive. That should have been the end of it. But for Harry, the story was just beginning. He had stayed behind at their Montecito residence, pretending to be engrossed in work, while his instincts were anything but focused on spreadsheets and emails. Through the tall windows, he noticed the faint glint of headlights as a sleek SUV pulled up outside. A figure emerged, tall, impeccably dressed, carrying the aura of Hollywood ambition that Harry had only ever read about in magazines or seen on television screens. Meghan stepped out, perfectly composed, greeting the figure with warmth and familiarity that seemed unusual. Harry felt a chill. Was it paranoia? Or had his instincts, honed by decades of scrutiny and experience, finally identified a genuine anomaly? He couldn't ignore it. Over the next few weeks, he began tracking these subtle arrivals, noting the hours, the frequency, the people involved. Each late-night meeting, each whispered appointment, each discreet dinner, built a mosaic of mystery that grew more intricate with every observation. One particularly striking night, Harry remembered, Meghan had insisted she was attending a script discussion at a local studio, something she had rehearsed in her calendar with meticulous precision. Yet, Harry's subtle checks, nothing invasive, just observation, revealed discrepancies. Cars arrived at times unaligned with studio schedules, names of supposed collaborators mismatched with publicly known personnel, and a sense of secrecy that clung like mist to every action. Harry began to question the nature of these meetings. Were they purely professional? Or did they conceal a more personal layer, hidden beneath the veneer of networking and ambition? Hollywood was notorious for blurred lines. The closer one got to the center of influence, the more personal and professional interactions overlapped. And the more Harry observed, the more he felt a gnawing concern that these late-night encounters were neither coincidental nor benign. He tried, initially, to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe I'm overthinking," he whispered to himself during solitary walks along the estate grounds. "Maybe these are just routine meetings." But instinct, relentless and precise, was not so easily dismissed. He began cross-referencing schedules, noting patterns that seemed too consistent to be random. Specific times, specific locations, recurrent faces, and a repeated sense that the entire narrative being presented to him was incomplete. Then came the messages. Little things, a quick text left unread, a short note deleted before being fully seen, an accidental glance at her phone screen revealing an unfamiliar name. These weren't signs in isolation. They were signals, subtle, careful, and deliberate, indicating a layer of activity hidden from him. And with each new clue, Harry's concern intensified. One night, unable to contain himself, he followed discreetly. Not out of mistrust for the sake of jealousy, but out of necessity for clarity. His heart pounded as he watched Meghan enter a nondescript building tucked away behind palm trees, the soft hum of city life around them. Lights flickered within, revealing silhouettes in discussion, gestures animated and intense. Harry's breath caught. This was not a casual chat. It was a negotiation, a planning session, a collision of ambition and secrecy. The suspense of observation was torturous. Every step, every glance, every movement was magnified in his mind. And then she emerged, moments later, smiling as if nothing had occurred, radiating the poise and calm that the world had come to associate with her public persona. Harry, watching from the shadows, felt a mix of relief and trepidation. Relief that nothing overtly alarming had occurred, but trepidation because the subtlety of it all was exactly what troubled him most. He began piecing together the network of late-night contacts. Hollywood producers, actors with burgeoning influence, consultants with connections across multiple media platforms. Each meeting seemed strategically timed, each person carefully chosen. And the question persisted, echoing relentlessly in his mind. For what purpose? For whose benefit? The meetings, when viewed individually, seemed innocent enough. But the cumulative effect painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The implication was stark, a series of secretive engagements that could, at minimum, influence Meghan's trajectory in Hollywood, and at maximum, intersect with personal dynamics that Harry had not fully understood. One particularly tense evening, he confronted her indirectly. "Another late-night meeting tonight?" he asked casually, sipping tea in the quiet of their home. Meghan's expression remained serene, practiced, yet her eyes betrayed the tiniest flicker of something. Hesitation? Surprise? Harry couldn't be sure, but the moment was enough to deepen the tension. He remembered thinking, not for the first time, that secrecy, even for professional purposes, always carries a shadow. The more hidden the activity, the more it invites suspicion, misunderstanding, and conflict. Harry's experience in public life had shown him that appearances mattered as much as reality, and sometimes more. If there was a truth hidden behind these meetings, clarity was not just desirable, it was essential. Days passed, and the pattern continued. Late nights blurred into early mornings, with Meghan appearing composed and radiant at social events, interviews, and gatherings, while the undercurrent of undisclosed interactions persisted. Harry felt a growing urgency. Trust, in his world, was built on transparency. Without it, relationships became fragile, brittle, prone to fracture at the slightest stress. The climax of this chapter, the moment that would mark a turning point, occurred during one particularly late evening. Harry, following yet another hint of secrecy, arrived at the periphery of a quiet studio lot. Shadows moved within, conversations carried over walls, and the subtle energy of ambition, negotiation, and intrigue was palpable. Meghan stepped out briefly, catching his gaze from a distance. The recognition in her eyes, the subtle acknowledgement of observation, sent a jolt through him. This was no longer a series of coincidences. The question that had haunted him from the first suspicion now demanded articulation. The one that had been whispered silently in the quiet of night, pondered during solitary walks, and considered through countless moments of observation. The question that cut through layers of ambiguity and demanded truth. Who is he, Meghan? Because it wasn't merely about late-night meetings or professional ambitions or the Hollywood machine. It was about honesty, transparency, and trust. And trust, once fractured, is a fragile construct, easily shattered by secrecy and omission. Harry had followed the trail, observed the evidence, pieced together the mosaic of hints and clues, and now he was ready to confront the full picture. The culmination of these late-night meetings was imminent. A revelation loomed just beyond the horizon, promising to upend routines, challenge assumptions, and alter the delicate equilibrium of their relationship. And in the quiet tension of that Montecito night, one truth became undeniable. The late-night meetings were not isolated incidents. They were a pattern, deliberate, consequential, and laden with implications. And the next confrontation, the moment when all the accumulated suspicions would be laid bare, was approaching faster than either of them realized. What Meghan would reveal or conceal next would determine whether the foundation of trust could endure or whether the revelations of these clandestine hours would fracture their relationship irreparably. The night was quiet, the world seemingly asleep, but for Harry, the storm of questions, suspicions, and anticipation raged with relentless intensity. And then came the moment that would change everything. A detail, small and easily overlooked, yet impossible to ignore. A text left open on a screen, a familiar name appearing in the message thread, a hint of connection that no one had expected. And in that instant, Harry knew that the confrontation was no longer avoidable. He would have to ask the question that had been forming in the shadows for weeks. Who is he, Meghan? The tension in the Montecito home had become almost unbearable. A quiet house, the soft hum of the ocean in the distance, the faint rustle of palm trees in the evening breeze. Yet beneath this serene exterior, an invisible storm was gathering. Harry could feel it in every corner of the house, every glance, every pause in conversation. He had seen the signs, traced the patterns, and followed the threads of secrecy like a detective piecing together a puzzle. And now, the moment of confrontation had arrived. It was a Thursday night. Meghan had returned from yet another meeting, her composure flawless, her smile immaculate, as if nothing in the world could touch her. But Harry had watched too closely, noted too many anomalies, to be swayed by appearances. He poured himself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter, gathering his thoughts, preparing himself for the question that would change everything. "Meghan," he began, voice calm but measured. "We need to talk about something." She looked at him, eyes curious, tilting her head slightly. "Of course," she replied, voice even. Nothing in her tone betrayed concern, but Harry knew better. He had learned over years of public scrutiny that calm surfaces often hide turbulent depths. "I've noticed," he continued, "there have been late-night meetings, calls, visits, people coming and going." He watched her carefully, gauging every micro-expression. Every subtle movement could betray a truth or conceal it. "I need to know. Who is he, Meghan?" The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. It was not an accusation. It was a demand for honesty, a request for clarity. But in that moment, the air felt charged, almost electrified. Time seemed to stretch, each second amplified by the gravity of the confrontation. Meghan's eyes widened ever so slightly, just enough for Harry to notice. She opened her mouth, paused, then closed it again. A flicker of something, hesitation, maybe fear, maybe calculation, crossed her face. For Harry, it was confirmation that his instincts had been accurate, that the late-night meetings were more than routine professional obligations. She began, then stopped, searching for the right words. Her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, a subtle nervous tick, almost imperceptible. Harry felt his pulse quicken. He was not here to accuse. He was here to uncover the truth. And the truth was always more powerful than assumption. "You don't have to explain everything tonight," he said gently, trying to maintain composure. "But I need transparency. I need honesty. I've seen the patterns, the schedules, the inconsistencies. I can't ignore them. And I can't move forward without knowing the truth." Meghan's expression softened slightly, a complex mix of defiance, vulnerability, and resignation. She inhaled slowly, as if preparing for a confession she had been rehearsing for weeks. Harry could feel the weight of anticipation pressing against him, the way a storm gathers before breaking. I have been working on some projects, she admitted, carefully chosen words that seemed to navigate between revelation and evasion. There are collaborations, opportunities, things I've been exploring that are important for my future. Harry nodded slowly, absorbing the statement. He had expected some form of professional explanation, but his instincts told him there was more beneath the surface. Projects with who, Meghan? Who are these opportunities with? She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the confirmation he needed that the truth was still partly concealed. People in Hollywood, she said finally, voice softening. Producers, actors, creatives. You know how it works. Yes, I know. Harry interrupted gently but firmly. I know how Hollywood works. But what I don't know is whether this is strictly professional. I've seen the patterns, Meghan. I've seen the late-night calls, the dinners, the visits. I need clarity. Who is he? The room was silent for a moment, filled only by the faint sound of the ocean outside. Meghan's eyes darted, her mind clearly racing, weighing options, calculating consequences. And then, as if the tension itself had reached a breaking point, she spoke. There's someone, she admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. Someone I've been discussing future projects with. It's professional, Harry, but I can see how it looks. I didn't intend to hide it from you. I wasn't sure how to explain it without making things complicated. Harry felt a mixture of relief and unease. Relief that there was no scandalous betrayal, at least not overtly. Unease because the details remained vague, the person unnamed, the secrecy unexplained. He needed specifics. Who, Meghan? Name him. Tell me exactly who. She inhaled, steadying herself. It's an actor, a producer, someone I've known professionally for a long time. We've been exploring potential collaborations, projects that could be significant for both of us. That's all it is. Harry could feel the tension in his chest, the mix of trust, skepticism, and need for transparency. He wanted to believe her, and part of him did. But years of experience, public life, and instinct told him that partial truths are often more dangerous than lies. He asked again, calmly but insistently. Name him, Meghan. I need full honesty. No omissions. Her eyes met his, unwavering now, steady but guarded. I can't, she said finally. Not yet. The projects aren't finalized. The timing isn't right. But I swear, Harry, it's professional. I've never done anything to betray your trust. Harry nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Trust, he realized, was fragile, delicate, like a glass ornament in the hands of fate. One misstep, one withheld detail, and it could shatter. I want to believe you, Meghan. I really do. But the secrecy, it's hard. It raises questions. And you know how questions grow when left unanswered. Meghan nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of the weight of her actions. I understand, she said softly. I'll tell you everything when I can. I promise. Harry took a deep breath, letting the words settle. There was no accusation, no confrontation in anger, just the demand for truth, the insistence on transparency. And yet, the tension remained, an invisible thread connecting them, taut and delicate. Because in relationships built on public scrutiny, trust is tested constantly. Secrets, even minor ones, have the power to ripple outward, causing consequences that neither party could anticipate. Harry understood this all too well. And now, as the night deepened, he realized that the revelation, when it came, could change everything. For Meghan, the challenge was clear. Navigate the professional ambitions and personal boundaries without breaking the fragile trust between them. For Harry, the challenge was equally daunting. Reconcile suspicion with love, observation with faith, and instinct with patience. And in that charged silence, the unspoken question lingered, heavier than any words could carry. Was there more than professional ambition behind these late-night meetings? Or had his suspicions been amplified by circumstance, paranoia, and the high-stakes scrutiny of life under the public eye? The answer, Harry knew, would not come easily. And the next revelation, the one that would push their relationship to the brink, was closer than either of them imagined. The confrontation had begun, and as the night stretched on, the shadows of uncertainty lengthened, hinting at truths yet to be revealed, secrets yet to be laid bare, and decisions that could alter the course of everything they had built together. Harry's final thought before sleep claimed him that night was simple but profound. The next time he asked the question, "Who is he, Meghan?" he might finally receive an answer that would change everything. The morning after the confrontation, the Montecito estate was quiet, almost eerily so. Sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, painting patterns on the marble floors. Birds chirped outside, oblivious to the emotional storm that had erupted inside the walls of the house. But Harry was already awake, alert, scanning his mind and the environment for clues. It wasn't enough to rely on words anymore. He needed proof, confirmation, evidence that could either absolve or confirm his suspicions. He had learned over the years that the truth rarely arrived in a neat package. It needed to be pieced together, like a jigsaw puzzle scattered across time and space. Harry began with the small things: text messages, email notifications, unusual calendar entries. He didn't have to dig deep. Patterns were there, subtle but undeniable. Messages from unknown numbers at odd hours, calendar blocks labeled ambiguously, meetings scheduled during times he knew Meghan was supposed to be elsewhere. The pieces were tiny, almost invisible individually, but together they formed a pattern too pronounced to ignore. He sat at his desk, laptop open, cross-referencing dates and times with public appearances, social media posts, and press coverage. Each anomaly stood out like a neon sign, demanding attention. He paused at one message in particular, a brief exchange that seemed innocent on the surface but carried undertones that made his gut tighten. "Can we meet tonight? Important to discuss the project." No sender listed, just a phone number. No context, just the words. And the timing, 2:47 a.m. Harry's mind raced. He recalled the nights when Meghan had returned home late, claiming early morning writing sessions or strategy calls. Could it be possible that these meetings weren't purely professional? Was there more to the story than he had been told? He continued investigating, meticulously checking every email, every message, every digital footprint. The deeper he dug, the more anomalies appeared. Invitations to private screenings, dinner reservations in obscure locations, cryptic references to Hollywood insiders. Each breadcrumb led to another, forming a trail that hinted at a secret world just beyond his reach. But Harry wasn't just gathering data. He was observing patterns. He noted the recurrence of certain names, the overlapping of locations with known industry figures, and the timing that often coincided with events he had not been invited to. There was a rhythm to it, a method hidden beneath the apparent randomness. And that rhythm, he realized, was what revealed the truth more clearly than any single piece of evidence could. He compiled his findings into a detailed timeline, color-coded and meticulously annotated. Blue for meetings, red for anomalies, yellow for potential professional contacts. By the time he finished, the visual representation of Meghan's activities was striking. It was a map of movement, secrecy, and connections, and it pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Something, or someone, was consistently present in the nights she was supposedly occupied with other tasks. Harry considered confronting her again, but he knew timing was everything. A misstep could shatter the fragile trust that remained. He needed to be strategic, not reactive. He needed to understand who this person was, what the meetings entailed, and why they had been kept secret. Late that afternoon, he called a trusted confidant, someone who had been part of their inner circle for years. "I need your eyes on something," Harry said, voice low and urgent. "I've noticed a pattern. I need to know if I'm seeing this correctly." Files were sent, screenshots exchanged, and after hours of analysis, the confirmation arrived. The patterns were real. There was consistency in the late-night communications. There were individuals who had access to Meghan during times when Harry had assumed she was unavailable. The evidence, while not incriminating in itself, raised more questions than it answered. As the sun set over Montecito, Harry felt a sense of urgency building within him. He had gone from suspicion to tangible proof, and now the stakes were higher. He had to decide how to approach the next step, how to confront Meghan again, how to navigate the murky waters of trust, ambition, and secrecy. But the evidence itself told a story, one that was complicated and fraught with potential consequences. It wasn't just about professional meetings or Hollywood connections. It was about transparency, honesty, and the invisible lines that define relationships under scrutiny. And as Harry stared at the compiled data, A single thought dominated his mind. The next revelation would not only clarify the situation, but could change everything. And that's when he noticed it. A single recurring name, hidden in plain sight across multiple entries, appearing in texts, emails, and calendar notes. The name alone carried weight, a connection to someone prominent, someone whose involvement could alter not only personal dynamics, but public perception. Harry leaned back, heart racing. He had found the thread that could unravel the mystery. All he needed now was to follow it carefully, to trace its origin, and to finally confront the truth head-on. Because the truth, once fully revealed, has a way of exposing not just actions, but intentions. And in the world they lived in, a world of public scrutiny, media speculation, and relentless observation, intentions could be just as explosive as deeds. The chapter closed with a chilling realization. The next time he confronted Meghan, he would not be asking questions with mere suspicion. He would be armed with evidence, with a pattern, with a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to a truth that neither of them could ignore. And Harry knew, deep down, that when Meghan finally revealed the identity of the person behind these secret meetings, it would ignite a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. By the following week, the tension in Montecito had evolved into something nearly tangible. The sprawling estate, with its manicured gardens and serene ocean views, could not mask the storm brewing inside. Harry moved through the house with a quiet determination, every glance, every footstep measured, every interaction now filtered through the lens of what he had discovered. He had the evidence, the trail of messages, the late-night meetings, the recurring name. And that name, that single link, had led him directly to Hollywood. Hollywood, a world of glittering premieres, private screenings, and star-studded parties, was a universe unto itself, a universe Meghan had been navigating for years. But Harry now understood that some of those interactions had been veiled in secrecy, hidden beneath the carefully curated public persona. Who were the people she had been meeting? What were the projects she had discussed? And most importantly, why had she concealed them? The first clue came from the messages themselves. A series of late-night texts referenced a high-profile producer with a history of collaborating on award-winning films. The messages were coded, seemingly mundane. Can we finalize the concept tonight? Or, your ideas are brilliant. Let's discuss further. But the timing and context were telling. These were not casual exchanges. They were meticulously timed, strategic, and discreet. Harry dug deeper, cross-referencing public events, interviews, and social media posts. He discovered that during several nights when Meghan claimed to be working on personal projects or attending charity events, there were private dinners with industry insiders. Locations were exclusive, invitation-only venues, often under the guise of industry networking. Every detail reinforced the pattern. She had been cultivating connections at the highest levels, and not all of these connections had been disclosed to him. The implications were both professional and deeply personal. On one hand, Meghan's ambition was evident. Hollywood is a competitive industry, and success often depends on relationships, timing, and strategic alliances. On the other hand, the secrecy surrounding these interactions cast a shadow of doubt over her transparency. Harry wrestled with the duality: ambition versus honesty, opportunity versus trust. He reached out to a few trusted sources in the industry, individuals who had connections to both Meghan and the mysterious producer. What he learned was illuminating. The producer in question was not just influential. He was known for leveraging relationships to advance projects and careers, often in ways that were carefully orchestrated and privately negotiated. Several sources hinted at dinners, late-night meetings, and private consultations, all opportunities for Meghan to discuss potential collaborations on future projects. Harry's pulse quickened as he realized the stakes. These weren't casual professional interactions. They were high-level negotiations, discussions that could shape the trajectory of Meghan's career and potentially their public narrative. And yet, despite the professional nature of these meetings, the secrecy surrounding them created an emotional chasm, a gap between intention and perception. The next piece of the puzzle came from public sightings. Paparazzi images, seemingly mundane, revealed moments that hadn't been publicly acknowledged. A late-night drive to a private studio. A discreet entrance into a luxury hotel for a working dinner. a fleeting appearance at a film screening with the producer. Each image, when placed alongside the messages and calendar entries, formed a narrative that was difficult to ignore. Meghan had been navigating a complex web of professional relationships, some of which had been intentionally concealed from Harry. The question, then, was not whether these meetings were professional. They clearly were, but why they had been kept secret. Was it a matter of timing, a strategic move to protect future projects, or was there something more personal at play? Harry had learned over the years that Hollywood thrives on optics. Perception is often as important as reality. Every move is calculated, every interaction measured. And now, he was part of the equation, a variable that had not been fully accounted for. As he pieced together the evidence, Harry began to consider the broader implications. The producer's involvement in Meghan's projects suggested potential collaborations that could elevate her profile in ways that were significant, even transformative. But the secrecy surrounding these discussions had sown seeds of doubt, casting shadows over their relationship. Trust, he realized, was a delicate balance, and the weight of hidden truths could tip the scales in unexpected ways. He decided it was time to confront the Hollywood connection directly. Not publicly, not through intermediaries, but personally. Harry needed clarity, not just about the projects themselves, but about the intentions behind them. He had questions that required answers, and the longer he waited, the more the uncertainty gnawed at him. Late that evening, he called Meghan into the private study. The room, dimly lit, reflected the gravity of the conversation that was about to unfold. He placed the evidence he had gathered on the table: messages, emails, photographs, timelines. Each piece was meticulously organized, each detail highlighting the pattern he had uncovered. "Meghan," he began, voice steady but firm, "I've traced the meetings, the communications, the late-night activities. I understand these are professional, but the secrecy is concerning. I need to know everything: who you've been meeting, what's being discussed, and why I wasn't aware." Meghan's expression was unreadable at first. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, taking a deep breath. "Harry, I wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure how it would be received. These meetings, these discussions, are crucial for my career. The producer is someone I've known for years, and the projects could be transformative. But timing, strategy. I thought I could manage it without causing worry." Harry nodded, absorbing the explanation. He wanted to believe her, and part of him did. But the emotional weight of secrecy, the erosion of trust, lingered. "I understand the professional angle," he said carefully. "But the secrecy, those are the parts that create doubt. I need honesty, full transparency, or the trust between us is compromised." Meghan met his gaze, unwavering now, a mixture of determination and vulnerability in her eyes. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll be fully transparent moving forward. No more secrets." The room fell silent, the tension palpable, but beneath the surface, both knew that the Hollywood connection was more than just a professional link. It was a test of boundaries, trust, and intentions. The unfolding story was far from over, and the next revelation promised to challenge everything they thought they knew about each other. As Harry left the room that night, the evidence laid bare and the conversation concluded, a single thought dominated his mind: the Hollywood connection was just the beginning. There were layers yet to uncover, motives yet to explore, and truths that would not remain hidden for long. And somewhere, in the intricate web of ambition, secrecy, and public perception, the next revelation was waiting, ready to surface, ready to change everything, and ready to push the delicate balance of trust to its breaking point. The clock struck midnight, but the Montecito estate was anything but asleep. Shadows stretched across the hallways, flickering with the soft glow of strategically placed lamps. The night carried a weight, heavy and suffocating, as if the very walls of the house held their breath in anticipation. Harry paced the study, mind racing, heart hammering. The Hollywood connection had provided clarity, but it had also opened a door to even deeper questions. There were patterns within patterns, threads that only became visible under the dim light of late-night scrutiny. Harry knew this because he had lived through similar storms before. The late-night hours were when truth surfaced, when reality refused to hide behind polite excuses and rehearsed statements. And tonight, he was determined to see everything clearly. He began by revisiting the messages once more, this time scrutinizing every word, every pause, every punctuation mark. Subtle changes in tone, unexpected phrasing, and cryptic references leapt out like hidden clues in a novel. He noticed repeated mentions of ideas, sessions, and exclusive previews. On the surface, professional jargon, but in the context of secrecy, each word carried an emotional charge. Harry's pulse quickened as he realized something else. These were not just meetings or projects, they were negotiations of influence. In Hollywood, influence is currency, and every late-night conversation, every undisclosed dinner, was a calculated move. The revelation was uncomfortable. He had known Meghan to be ambitious, but ambition cloaked in secrecy? That was an entirely different dynamic, one that tested trust and loyalty in ways he had never anticipated. He remembered the first time he had sensed that something was amiss. A fleeting glance at a phone screen, a message disappearing too quickly, a shadow in her eyes when she spoke of working late. At the time, he had brushed it off, attributing it to the pressures of public life. But now, with the evidence laid bare, those moments took on a new significance. Each small anomaly was part of a larger narrative, one that demanded attention and clarity. The night deepened. Harry, restless, decided to leave the study and walk the property, hoping the ocean breeze would clear his mind. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore, rhythmic and relentless, as if echoing the turmoil within him. He replayed conversations in his head, considering not just what had been said, but what had been left unsaid. The silence between words often spoke louder than the words themselves. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A new message. Not from Meghan, not from anyone familiar. The text was brief. "We need to talk. Now." No signature, no context, only urgency. Harry's instincts flared. He knew this was a turning point. The late-night revelations were far from over. This was just the beginning. He followed the instructions, arriving at a secluded part of the estate. There, waiting in the shadows, was someone unexpected, a close confidant who had long navigated the complex web surrounding the couple. "Harry," the figure whispered, "there's more you need to know. The meetings you've seen, they're only the surface. There are layers beneath, connections that could change everything." Harry's mind raced. Layers beneath? Connections that could change everything? He had thought he understood the situation, but now the horizon had expanded, revealing complexities he had not anticipated. Every late-night message, every concealed meeting, was part of a network far larger than he had imagined, a network that intertwined Hollywood influence, strategic partnerships, and personal ambition. The confidant handed him a file, thick and weighty. "Go through this carefully," they said. "It's the full picture. And Harry, not everything here is easy to accept." Harry returned to the study, file in hand, and began to sift through the contents. There were contracts, schedules, private communications, and notes, evidence of collaborations, proposals, and negotiations that had never been disclosed to him. Each document was a revelation, each page a puzzle piece that added depth and complexity to the story he thought he already knew. One document, in particular, drew his attention. A proposal for a high-profile project involving a renowned actor, with timelines overlapping the very nights Meghan had been working late. The document detailed private consultations, strategic planning sessions, and a web of connections linking her to powerful figures in the entertainment industry. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The secret meetings weren't just casual or minor. They were central to a major trajectory in her career. But the more Harry uncovered, the more tangled the web became. There were personal nuances, emotional undertones woven into professional dealings. Notes hinted at discussions that were not purely about projects but about influence, opportunity, and, perhaps, something more intimate. The boundaries between professional ambition and personal secrecy blurred, creating a tension that was almost unbearable. As the night wore on, Harry's thoughts turned inward. He questioned his own assumptions, his own judgments. He had approached the situation with suspicion, but now he realized that understanding required more than doubt. It required perspective, patience, and a willingness to see beyond surface appearances. The late-night revelations were as much about him as they were about Meghan. Hours passed. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Harry closed the file, exhausted but resolute. He had seen enough to understand that the path forward was fraught with complexity, that every action, every word, every decision would carry weight. Trust, transparency, and communication had become the currency of survival, and navigating these revelations required skill, empathy, and courage. And just as he was beginning to process the enormity of what he had learned, his phone buzzed again. Another message. Short, ominous, direct. You don't know the half of it. Meet me tonight. The truth is bigger than you can imagine. Harry's heart skipped a beat. The late-night revelations were far from over. In fact, they were only beginning. What lay ahead promised to shatter assumptions, expose hidden agendas, and challenge the very foundation of the trust he had once taken for granted. He leaned back, staring at the rising sun over the Pacific, a sense of anticipation mingled with dread settling over him. The night had revealed truths, but it had also posed questions that demanded answers. And Harry knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that the next revelation would not only clarify the situation, but would change everything. The moon hung high over Montecito, casting silvery shadows across the estate. Every corner of the property seemed to pulse with tension, as if the night itself were bracing for what was about to unfold. Harry paced the marble floors of the hallway, mind racing, fingers tightening around the edges of the folder he had studied endlessly. The late-night revelations were no longer abstract. They were a living, breathing web of secrets that demanded confrontation. And tonight, under the cover of darkness, he would confront Meghan. He knew the conversation would be volatile. Secrets, once uncovered, cannot be reburied. Lies, once suspected, cannot be forgotten. Harry's approach was deliberate. He had rehearsed questions in his mind, carefully weighing the tone, the phrasing, the timing. This was not about accusation alone. It was about uncovering truth, demanding honesty, and reclaiming the transparency that had been eroded. He found Meghan in the study, the same room where their earlier discussion had taken place. The soft lamplight painted her features in sharp relief, her eyes a mixture of weariness and anticipation. She had sensed the urgency in Harry's movements, the intensity in his gaze, and the weight of the folder in his hands. Something was coming. Harry began without preamble, his voice steady but edged with emotion. Meghan, I've gone through everything. The messages, the meetings, the schedules. The late nights, the secret dinners, it all points to one thing. There's more here than you've told me. I need the truth now. Meghan's lips parted slightly, a flicker of surprise passing across her face. Her hands clenched unconsciously in her lap. Harry, I wanted to tell you, she began, her voice soft, but I wasn't sure how to explain without making it sound worse than it is. These meetings, the producer, the actor, it's all professional. Harry's jaw tightened. Professional or not, the secrecy is the problem. The deception, whether intentional or not, creates doubt. I've seen the schedules, the private dinners, the messages that vanish as soon as I enter the room. Who is he, Meghan? The words left his mouth with a force that made even him flinch. There it was, the question that had been burning in his mind for weeks, now spoken aloud, slicing through the tension like a knife. For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of a clock, each second amplifying the gravity of the confrontation. Meghan's eyes widened, a flicker of shock crossing her expression. Harry, she whispered, it's not what you think. Then explain it, he demanded, his voice rising slightly. Because from where I stand, it looks like late-night meetings, hidden messages, and secret dinners. And the name keeps coming up, the producer. Who is he, Meghan? What's going on? Meghan drew a deep breath, her fingers twisting in her lap. He's someone I've known professionally for years, she began carefully. The meetings are for upcoming projects, collaborations that could define the next phase of my career. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to cause worry. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. Harry paced, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Strategic? This feels personal, Meghan. The secrecy, the shadows, the disappearing messages. How am I supposed to trust anything if you withhold these details? His voice carried the weight of betrayal, the exhaustion of sleepless nights spent unraveling what he had suspected but could not prove. She stood, facing him directly now, eyes shining with intensity. Harry, I made a mistake by not being upfront. But the projects, the collaborations, they matter. They are big opportunities, ones I can't afford to risk. I thought I could manage it without causing stress. I never meant to hurt you. Harry's mind reeled. The explanation was plausible, yet the emotional sting remained. Trust had been fractured, and even the most convincing rationale could not immediately mend it. He paused, considering the evidence in his hands, the documents that detailed private meetings, exclusive dinners, and strategic communications. Each piece reinforced the narrative. Ambition and secrecy had collided, and he was caught in the middle. Meghan, he said finally, voice quieter now but firm. I need to understand boundaries. Professional ambitions are one thing, but our relationship, our life together, cannot exist in secrecy.